Everybody. Thanks for coming. This is a panel about how literary journals. What is our official title? How we publish literature in translation. I'm Susan Harris, the editorial director of Words Without Borders. I have four wonderful colleagues from. Actually, we have four other people on the panel representing roughly 60 other magazines because everyone tends to do multiple things. To my far right is Scott Esposito, who is, get the official bio, he's co-author of The End of Oulipo with Lauren Elkin. His writing has appeared in the TLS, in Words Without Borders, in the White Review, in the Point Book Forum, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, the San Francisco Chronicle, and many others. He's a senior editor for the Journal of Translation 2 Lines, also runs the Quarterly Conversation, and he also does publicity for the translation presses 2 Lines Press and Deep Vellum. And Scott is going to be talking about 2 Lines, also about the Quarterly Conversation. To my right is Julia Sherwood, born and grew up in Bratislava and then Czechoslovakia. After studying in Germany, she settled in the UK. She worked for Amnesty International and Save the Children. Since 2008, she's been working as a freelance translator of fiction and nonfiction from Slovak, Czech, and Polish. And you can read her fantastic translations at Words Without Borders in our November Czech issue and also in our February issue where she guest edited a collection of guest edited and translated a selection of Slovak women's writing for us. She chairs NGO Rights in Russia, and she is the editor-at-large for Slovakia for Asymptote, which was honored last night. So Julia is going to be talking about Asymptote. To my immediate left is Daniel Medin. He is an associate professor of Comp Lit and English at the American University of Paris. He runs the Center for Writers and Translators. He's an editor for the Cahiers series, also for Music and Literature magazine and the White Review. And he's going to be talking about music and literature and the White Review. And to my far left is Sean Malangas Dafydd, an author, poet, and translator. Her first published novel, Etridiad Path, I'm sorry about that, The Third Thing, won the National Eisteddfod Literature Medal. She writes in both Welsh and English. She often collaborates with authors of other disciplines. She was selected in 2013 for the Literary Translation Mentorship Program run by the BCLT. She publishes short fiction and poetry. She's currently working as a creative writing lecturer at the American University of Paris. And she's co-editor of, Sean, I'm never going to be able to pronounce this properly.
We have
Onead, thank you, which nurtures new voices, and the literary review Taliesin, both in Welsh language. And so Sean's going to talk about those. So I thought we could start off by asking each of our panelists to tell a bit about his or her respective magazine or magazines, and essentially what the editorial philosophy is, and just in general about what you are doing. So Scott, would you like to lead off?
Sure. I guess I'll talk about 2 Lines first. 2 Lines is a journal of translated literature. It was founded in 1994. It comes out twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall. And we pretty much do just the best prose and poetry that we can find. We have open submissions year-round. We print it bilingually. We do the full bilingual for poetry, and we do 1 page of the original for prose. I guess from time to time we'll run interviews. We'll also run essays occasionally. And I guess just kind of the philosophy is just, really to have a combination of some of the more interesting things that people don't know about, as well as trying to get very interesting work from more established authors and translators, people like Lydia Davis, people of that order. So that's 2 Lines. The Quarterly Conversation was founded about 10 years ago. That's primarily a publication of criticism. We do publish a little bit of works in translation, but it's more about writing about translation from a critical angle. We do again a lot of interviews with translators and authors. We will we try to cover as much as we can things that are very interesting but have not actually been translated into English before. And oftentimes that coverage leads to publication in English down the line when people see how interesting the books are. But it's really just kind of trying to bring like the ethic of the New York Review of Books, those really long, in-depth essays to things that are not being covered by those types of venues, which is often work in translation.
Julia?
Right. Can you hear me? So Asymptote is an online journal that was founded 4 years ago by Liu Liang, who is based in Taiwan. And it is a journal dedicated to literary translation and tries to mediate encounters between languages. It publishes fiction, non-fiction, criticism, poetry, drama, and also quite a bit of visual content that is linked to translation. It doesn't actually have an office. It's run entirely virtually. The staff are scattered all around the world. So there are, I try to count it, and I think there's staff are in 24 different countries. And it's all done purely on a voluntary basis, so nobody actually gets paid. There are individual section editors, so each of these section editors has their own expectations of the type of work that they welcome, but what it all has in common is that it should be innovative, compelling. I've written down some more eclectic, boundary-pushing, off-the-beaten path, things like that. And it's generally, everything is published in English translation. Sometimes some pieces are translated simultaneously into more languages. Also, whenever possible, there is a sample of an audio sample of the text in the original language, so you can click on that, and often read by the author, sometimes by the translator. And my role is that of editor at large for Slovakia. There are 21 editors at large, each representing the country and culture, and it's a kind of dual role. The main part of the role is to act as a radar, bring to the attention of Asymptote interesting writing from their respective countries, and then not necessarily push their own translations, although most of us are translators, but translations by other people. But also to promote Asymptote in their own countries. So I have a list of a growing list of people interested in translation, writers, literary critics, and I try to bring the attention, their attention to interesting writing from around the world.
I'm the editorial director of wordswithoutborders.org. We were founded. Actually, we were dreamed up in the late 90s by Elaine Saliano-Mason, who's a senior editor at W.W. Norton, and co-founded with Samantha Schnee, who's now our London office. We launched in September of 2003. We publish monthly, and every issue has a theme, either a topic, a country or a geographical region, or a language. Again, because we publish monthly, we do anywhere from 10 to some months as many as 20 pieces in an issue. At this point, we have we've published over 2,000 pieces by writers from 128 countries, translated from 106 languages. And the great bulk of that, where we don't have any rights problems, the great bulk of that is archived. So everything we publish is available in perpetuity. We look particularly for literature, obviously of high literary quality, that's a given, but we're also looking for literature and writing that has a strong sense of place, because much of our focus is on the notion of exploring the world, understanding the world through its literature. Again, particularly we are based in the U.S., we were founded in New York. Particularly being in the U.S., we do understand the rest of the country, much of the rest of the world, through a strictly political prism. And much of our goal is to expand our understanding of other cultures, other countries, to understand the rest of the world beyond what beyond this simple national government political situations. We have a very small staff. We have 3 full-time people, 2 in New York. I'm based in Chicago. Again, Samantha holding down the European end of things, working here part-time in London. Daniel.
Yes. So the White Review is a London-based print journal. It appears 3 times yearly. There's also an online version of it, which is updated every single month. It is largely focused on literature and visual culture, and I would say that there's a special privilege given to young writers in the magazine, fiction writers and poets, as well as literature and translation. So largely my work for the White Review concerns literature and translation, feeding pieces to the main print magazine's editors and editing a translation issue for the online edition once a year. Music and literature, which is based, the editors all live in different cities, but was founded by Taylor Davis Van Atta in Montpelier, Vermont. It is a biannual print issue, which basically consists of 3 monographs of about 100 pages each, all about artists that the 2 of us admire. And then there is also has a website, and the website is updated weekly. There's a feature section. There is a reviews section. The reviews section focuses largely on literature and translation. We have a digital music editor who focuses on a lot of classical contemporary. And we have features in which we also try to support the different artists that have appeared in the print magazine. We have an event series to support each issue because it seems very strange to talk about literature but not hear any, not to talk about music but actually not hear any of it. Where we have readings as well as performances. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Sean.
So I'd like to speak about Taliesin rather than Anea. Taliesin is celebrating its 53rd birthday this year. And I'm a co-editor. So Taliesin is published exclusively in the Welsh language 3 times a year. Now, the Welsh language, arguably a minority language, and it was begun in order to showcase Welsh literature when the Academy itself was established. So a sort of gathering point for Welsh writers so that their voices could be heard, that they had a place to reunite and socialize. In fact, that was part of the reason. So we have been editing this magazine now for the last 5 years, and one of our really important missions with it is this question of how to make a Welsh language review an international magazine, as well as, of course, sticking to that very important brief of representing Welsh writers. So we've stretched that further to also be to represent translators, whether into the Welsh language or from the Welsh language. And we have a particular item in Taliesin that is, I think, one of my favorite parts of the magazine. This is called Dwy Ffenest, 2 windows, looking onto the world and back into Wales. And we identify that there's a difficulty among Welsh publishers, which is that the question arises, why should I read this? Even if it's a Welsh book, why should I read this? There are so many things, why should I read this? We need to convince the editors and we need to convince the readers why they should read something written by someone who has a name they can't pronounce. When there are obstacles put in their place, and I've even heard editors say, I'm not interested if I can't pronounce the name. So what we're doing is showcasing work from all over the world and allowing a Welsh writer to pick that work. So when it comes to why should I read this, the Welsh writer will tell you why. They will tell you why they've chosen it, what it means to them, how it affects them, why it's important to Wales, why it's important to their writing, to their thinking, to their life, to their love. And we have this item each time. What's also very important to us is that the translators are paid as the creative writers, poets, etc. are also paid. So they're not paid as much as I would like them to be, but
Who is?
they're paid.
I thought our next question would be our sources of content, because I think certainly, regardless of the pace you're keeping, there is when you're publishing a journal, there is a constant need for, and I hate to say content because it always sounds like, again, that you're commodifying literature, which of course, again, as Sean said, none of us is being paid. So, but Scott, what are the different sources for content? Where does Two Lines? Where do you look?
Yeah. Well, so as I said before, we do have rolling submissions, and they're just year-round. We get a lot of very interesting things that come to us that way. There's also a lot of translators, an ever-growing list of people that we respect and that we admire, that we reach out to. Everyone who works with Two Lines, we all read a lot of translation. We're all kind of very keyed in to what the new releases are, all of those sorts of things. So, we're constantly finding new names. We're going to conferences like this and meeting people. So there is a fair amount of solicitation, just kind of finding out what new things people are working on. Often translators are the very best guides to what's new and interesting in that world. And there are also, our fellow publishers. We do a number of serials in each issue, so we're always kind of seeing, the presses that we admire, the new people who are kind of coming up in the scene and doing interesting things, just, what they're working on, what's upcoming, even projects that they had to pass on or they could not make work, just kind of what's in the mix with all of them.
Well, the editors at large, but also I think all the other editors basically keep their eyes open and scout about and propose content. But it's also possible to submit translations through the submit button on the website. And then there are also events organized. Asymptote is also trying to forge partnerships with journals, which is also a way of getting access to interesting new writing from various countries. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier was that really what we're trying to feature is underrepresented languages, and also the work that's published is only material that hasn't been published before in English.
Right. I think we all probably publish only first translations, don't we? Yeah, there's a, okay.
Yes and no. At least in our case, for the print magazine of music and literature, because I think there are two different sets of issues, and the content is different in many respects. For the print issues, because the principle is that you have these three large portfolios, it's more easy to speak about the next issue that's in proofs now. It will feature one portfolio on the Croatian writer Dubravko Ugrejic, another portfolio on the Argentinian poet Alejandra Pizarnik, who died in the 70s, and then there's a final portfolio on a Ukrainian composer named Victoria Poleva, who's about 50 years old. So in each case, a part of each of these portfolios, and they all run about 100 pages, will be previously untranslated into English, at least, content. So, and some of that will be, in the case of Ugrejic, it's going to be a 7,000-word excerpt from a novel in progress and a brand new interview. In the case of Pizarnik, this is a writer who's been around, but very little of her work has appeared into English to date. And so we actually have excerpts from uncollected poems, from her diaries, from letters sent and unsent. We work very closely with either the estate or the artist, if the artist is still alive. So that's about half of each. And then in the case of Poleva, the composer, we have correspondence with musicians that she's worked with Gidon Kramer, people who have commissioned pieces. And she wrote a number of autobiographical essays in Russian that we've had translated for the issue. But the other part of each portfolio is appreciations and critical essays. And we try to make the representation global in each case. So we commissioned a young Dutch writer to respond, because Ugrejic has been living in the Netherlands since the Balkan Wars, and we wanted to have a Dutch representation of her work. There is somebody else who's from Yugoslavia who's writing about a different book by her. We have Sam Sachs, who writes about literature and translation for the Wall Street Journal, talking about a different book. So we try to have that global representation in each case. And then with the online issue, I would say content really depends on the section. It's book reviews, the literature ones, where we, and I speak collectively of the editors, we pick new material. We want to support the projects we like. We want to support the writers we like. We want to support the translators we like. And I mean, it really comes down to that. The tastes are very similar with other people here on the board, but it's a reflection of the people we choose to support. And I'm glad that there's the online issue, because that allows us to kind of, on the one hand, if we're focusing in the print issue on, even if we have younger contributors and younger writers, these are largely they're well established in their fields but not known elsewhere, artists. It's good to be able to actually support a book that has just come out that happens to be Indonesian. And so that's the online.
With the Welsh language, what's interesting as well, of course, is that in some cases we're publishing things translated into the Welsh which have never been seen in English, and it means that certain talent within Wales sort of comes to the surface that we're able to identify through networking events like this, as you were saying, finding people in Wales. When you start saying we can't run this project for more than a few years, we don't have enough people in Wales who speak multiple languages, and we're still rolling. So in some cases we are translating things into the Welsh that don't exist in English, and in other cases we're also using the English as a bridge language. So we're open to all of those different possibilities.
I think something that always comes up, again, some of us are online only, some of us are mixed model, print and online. Sian, are you print and online, or?
We are print, and then certain articles, certain pieces are available online in due course, yes.
Okay. And Scott, Two Lines is all print, but is there, forgive me for not remembering this, is there an online component as well?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
It had been all print until maybe just a few years ago, and then we began to offer things that are exclusively online. And now what we do, each issue will have a mixture of things that are exclusively online, as well as a few pieces from the print that we're offering to make available online.
How do you select what's print, what's online, how do the two platforms work?
I mean, it's definitely something you have to put a little thought into. I mean, certain things that will work in print, like maybe for instance, we try not to do individual poems either in print or online, because it's just a little strange to have just one poem kind of in the middle of a journal. But occasionally it will happen that something like that will be right for the print journal. I don't think we would do something like that online. It just kind of dangles out there in the world. Like, we'd like to have a little bit more of a robust representation of a poet if we're going to put it on into the online medium. So you do have to think about it a little bit in that case. Then when you get to prose, sometimes there are length considerations, things that may work at a print length are not going to work at an online length. And we also do kind of try to get it to function, in accord with one another. We will have stuff both in print and online by the same writer, complementary things. Maybe one piece of prose will work well for the print issue, and then one piece of prose will work well for the online component. And and we do kind of see it as a way to channel readers either to the print side or the online side. If we post a link on Twitter and you come to the site and you read the story that's in the online issue, that can be a way of getting you keyed in to all the other things that are going on in the print issue, which also has a story by the same writer.
And of course, Quarterly Conversation is all online, is it?
Quarterly Conversation is 100% online.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah. Daniel, how do you make that decision, or what goes into that? How do you choose what's online, what's print, what's?
I mean, I
know you covered it a bit in your last comment.
Well, it's somewhat similar to what Scott's saying. I mean, it's a nuanced decision in every case, and you're being strategic about. So if we're talking about the print issue, that aspect of music and literature, then I would say there are certain pieces that are the showcases, and that we, we don't want that have to remain for the print issue. I would say also long fiction, there are things that work online well and there are other things that don't. I think there's a threshold after which even my span of attention starts to waver with fiction online, reading it, after a certain number of words, maybe 3,000, I don't know. But in each case, you're making a decision where you can obviously reach more people online. We have a website, and so you want to attract people. You want to obviously interest people in the issue as well as in the artist. And on the other hand, you want people to subscribe as well and to buy the print issue and to have some sense of exclusivity, at least, that it's a beautiful material object and that some of these other more ambitious pieces are actually in the print issue itself. Beyond that, I would say with the one of the good things about having an online, part of the project is that since we do these portfolios, we stick with the authors long afterwards. So, for example, when last year Laszlo Krasznahorkai, the Hungarian author who's featured in the second issue of Music and Literature, was awarded the second consecutive Best Translated Book Award in the United States, we thought, well, this is a nice way to celebrate is we'll make public one of these pieces that we had written up from the issue that had previously been print only. So this had been published 2 years ago. But since we tried to represent his entire career, so we had people. This was somebody writing about his first novels, and also a recent book. Many of the books that were set in Asia, written in the last 10 years. Whereas his reputation in the United States and in English was based on his very first works from the early 80s, and they're very different works. And it just happened to be great because the next work to appear in English is actually set in China, and that's in part of this review. And so we did the same thing. It's titled Krasznahorkai's Pilgrimages, but it's online, so we were able to go to Laszlo and say, do you have any pictures of your time in Japan at any temples or anything like that? And within 24 hours, this was just luck and timing, we had a set of images of him looking at the original manuscripts of Zeami, who's one of the founders of No Theater, and is featured in Seiobo as well. So, and that we were able to custom make something in response to the award as a kind of tribute to him. But that was, as I say, from the print issue 2 years before.
And I think, obviously, being online affords a degree of immediacy and the degree of responsiveness that I think also it is somewhat incumbent upon us because we are exclusively online and because the magazine is monthly, but we have a blog that we update every day, and of course we try to social media as much as social has become a verb, which it really troubles me, but we do try to social as much as we can. But there is, I think, a responsibility. I think among those of us who publish literature and translation, people are coming to us for information on world events, not necessarily, as I said earlier, not necessarily for insight on politics or government, but to understand some context. And I think, again, being able to respond to something, just as an example, when Obama spoke, when the U.S. normalized relations with Cuba that must have been December, we know that Esther Allen, who's a wonderful translator of Spanish literature, is working on a biography of Jose Marti. Obama quoted Marti in his speech. We were able to ask Esther to write a piece about that, and that was in the blog 2 days later. So that was an example of taking something that was a literary reference in a political context and presenting the literary angle of it. But again, if we had had to wait for a print pub date, by the time we were able to do it, people would have moved on. But Sean, how about you with your mixed medium?
Well, I think what's important for any of us is to look at the benefits of the format that we have. So Taliesin comes out, as I was saying, 3 times a year. We can't be immediate. We can't review a piece of theatre and expect that people are going to read it before the run is over. What we can do is create a beautiful object. What we can do is showcase work and hope that perhaps it has a life beyond that. So in the case of this translating regular feature I was speaking about, 2 or 3 of the authors in that case have mentioned to me that by being commissioned that they had started a creative process of their own and were thinking of developing it into a book. So I really see it as nourishing something that may become something in another format with its own cover somewhere else, but also preparing the editors and helping their understanding of why this is important to do, why this is exciting to do. And the readers in Taliesin also are really ready for this kind of information. So that's what we can do with a magazine that is 129 pages and comes out 3 times a year. Beyond that, I think that there is very little positive to be gained by saying, oh, I wish we could also be that. In a Neuadd, on the other hand, so a Neuadd is a website that was created specifically to support younger voices. In that case, it's focused more on mentorship rather than payment. Now, we haven't published a single piece of translation as yet, but my mission with that is to make sure that we're able to reach really young translators and help them. Very much like a project that I recently did with Alexandra Buchler at the university in Calcutta, Jadavpur University. So with Literature Across Frontiers, we went over and worked with undergraduate students. Now, I don't speak Bengali. They do. And together we translated a short story. And what's interesting is that I was able to help them understand which questions need to be asked. And so 3 of us translated a short story, only 2 of us spoke the original language. And I think that's the kind of thing I'd really hope to do with a Neuadd in the future, so that we're accessing Welsh language academics and writers who also have this fantastic ability to reach to another language that I can't, and help them take the steps, which are not automatic. I've heard too often people saying, I can speak 2 languages, therefore I can translate.
No.
And to help a younger translator understand the steps that need to be taken.
Exactly. And I think we're all interested in, obviously it's always very exciting to publish an established author, but I think we're all really focused on excuse me, the microphone attacked me. I think we're all really focused also on finding new writers and exposing bringing new writers to the attention not only of readers but of publishers. I know that is it's a major part of our mission. We want to find writers, we want to bring them into English, and we want to make them available to readers and to publishers and editors, not only in the US and the UK, but also around the world, who perhaps do not read source languages but do read English. And to date, in the 10 years that we've, in the 12 years that we've been in the 12 years that we've been publishing, I think 20 authors have signed book contracts for books as a result of excerpts appearing in our pages. And one of those was a Romanian author who sold Spanish rights because the Spanish publisher couldn't read the Romanian, but found the English excerpt very appealing. So again, it's that notion of bringing people to the community, making them available, and also I think we probably all are also really focused on, again, to pick up on your mentorship point, also on finding and helping young translators, because it's obviously, if we want to stay in business, we need to have not only the senior translators, but we also need to have the junior group coming along as more work becomes available, as there is more interest in work in translation. It's crucial to have as many good translators available as possible. And another thing that we're very happy about is when book publishers come to us and ask for translators and ask for references for translators for book projects they're looking for. And it's very satisfying if I can match a publisher with a translator and help people get their first book projects, which again are essential for translators' CVs.
One thing that I'd like to add to that is, as important as it is, of course, to nourish this new wave of translators, one thing that I think maybe all of us feel, you can let me know, is that our hands are a little bit tied. Almost all of us are representing reviews who don't have the funds to pay their translators. And so a young translator has to ask themselves the question, is this a career that I want? I'm not going to be paid. So how do you encourage someone to do something that is a labor of love for more than maybe a Saturday afternoon? And I think that that's a really crucial question, and I would like it not to be a pink elephant in the corner.
Yes, absolutely. Julia.
Yes, I wanted to say that Asymptote also does a lot to encourage young emerging translators, and one of the things is a translation contest called Close Approximations. It's a poetry translation contest. And just to come back to the point about the various platforms, so Asymptote is online only, and it comes out quarterly, and each of the sections, the pieces are selected to kind of create some kind of coherent whole. So it can sometimes happen that a translation that's submitted and that is accepted may not appear immediately. It may take some time. However, Asymptote also has a blog which is updated daily, and that also invites, apart from the typical blog pieces and reviews and reports and news, also translations. And so for someone who wants to break into the business, this is a way of having a piece published more quickly.
I'd like to go back to Sean's point about payment. Again, there is this constant problem that many journals, and certainly literary journals that specialize in literature and translation, are not alone in this. Many literary journals, regardless of the languages in which they publish, do not pay contributors. We do pay. We're entirely grant supported, and we were able, thanks to a generous grant, to raise our translator and author honoraria from appalling to merely offensive, and I hope to I hope to get it up to the annoying stage in the next year. But Scott, what does Two Lines do?
Yeah, Two Lines is paid both for the print and the online. I think maybe we're in the sub-appalling range of the spectrum, but there is payment, and yeah, I mean, I think definitely when you consider these questions, you do have to take more of a holistic viewpoint. I mean, I do a lot of writing for a lot of various places. Some of it is paid well, some of it is paid mediocre, and some of it is not paid at all. And I mean, there are always a number of factors that come into consideration, and definitely by the time a translator has reached the point where they have a really worked piece of prose that they'd like to send to us to publish, they're definitely very invested. People don't, in my experience, people don't start translating just kind of as a random thing they decide to do on a Saturday afternoon. It's a real something they've grown into because they've had some profound experiences somewhere in their lifetime, and they've acquired a language, and they've really fallen in love with the culture, and maybe even with the writing of an author or a poet. So I mean, I think all of that does have to come into consideration, and certainly we want these things to be well funded and well paid, but you do kind of have to take more of that sort of a viewpoint when you're thinking about these questions.
Julia, obviously Asymptote's staff is entirely volunteer, and the contributors are as well. Have you found that that's had, has there been any, are you aware of any resistance to that? Has it had an effect on what you're able to publish?
Well, not personally, but it is a controversial issue, obviously. And I think in terms of staff, I think it does mean that there is some turnover, because people often take on a position and they do it as a labor of love, out of enthusiasm, but then they move on in their careers, a paid job comes along, and they just can't dedicate the time. And the time commitment is quite substantial. And the funding, basically, there is no regular source of funding. I think for the first couple of years, it's been basically bankrolled by the founder. And so far, we've run 2 successful Indiegogo campaigns. The most recent one was in January, which raised $25,000. And most of that money is going to the maintenance of the website. Also there will be some prizes for the winners of the contest.
Daniel, how about White Review and Music and Literature?
I mean, in both cases, White Review is a registered charity, and Music and Literature is officially a not-for-profit. So, and the staff in both cases is completely volunteer, so it is a labor of love. As far as funding goes, it's always case by case. It's always a question of what you'll manage for that issue. There's a question between the print and the online, and those have been changing. The disadvantage is obviously that there is a scramble, that we devote much of our time and resources into ensuring that we can actually put out the issue, and that we can figure out that we can compensate people as well as possible. Part of the complication is also the event series, because it's one thing to ask an author to read out of a book that she wrote 2 years ago. It's another thing to ask a violinist to learn a very difficult score and then perform it in a bookstore for free. You can't do that, actually. So there's constant that work on trying to get the funds. And in many cases, as Scott said, it's also, there are people who are in it. It is the labor of love. And so, for example, and this works for both the translators that we employ or work with, as well as, the authors themselves, the poets themselves who are featured. Now, the flip side, because I think this has to be brought into it, of financial pressure is essentially that we have complete editorial freedom. And I think that by we, I mean both of these magazines. For the most part, we print what we like. And, we can actually devote 130 pages to a Croatian writer who lives in the Netherlands, and to a Ukrainian composer who doesn't have a single CD available in the United States. And there's something about that when you keep talking to when I speak to friends who are editors at more commercial presses. Many of them are actually good readers. You may not like their lists, but there are these commercial pressures that aren't brought to bear in our situation. For us, it's more just like, how do we find the resources to pay for this? The other end of it is, it's not even if you're talking about online content and a translator who's doing some advocacy work for free, right? We also, I'm sure it's the same with you, we all work in the same industry. And so a good example for this would be Jan Stein. He's an Afrikaans student. He's from South Africa. He studied at our university in a translation program. He translated a book by Edouard Levé, Suicide, from French, but also now translates from Dutch and Afrikaans. As a result of our collaboration, he wrote several pieces he wrote something in the Quarterly Conversation, for example, about Ivan Vladislavich. He did an interview of Vladislavich in the White Review. These were free, online. But that as his career progressed, I see that somebody needs a translator from Dutch, and it was well paid. I was able to recommend him for that. And I think everybody here knows this kind of situation because nobody just does one thing, where we all network. It is ultimately a small audience of people who do care and are, just because of selfish pleasure, literature and translation. And we know each other and we share tips. Your new online editor, Katie Khan, is somebody who's been a contributor to music and literature, who's written for the Quarterly Conversation. So, I think there's a shared project here, and people do look out for each other.
Absolutely. It's funny. There was a cartoon in some U.S. paper, and I'm sure some version of this has appeared all over the world, but in reference to the fact that people, for some reason, people are expected to write for free, whether it's writing in your original language or writing in translation. And this cartoon showed a variety of people in different jobs. A surgeon, in the operating room saying, "Well, it's not paid, but it's such good exposure," and an attorney in the courtroom saying, "Well, no, I'm not salaried, but I'm getting my name out," and all of the arguments that are made. But I think Daniel's point is well taken. I think. Again, we're particularly reminded of it being here in the Literary Translation Center, where we all are very much part of a community, and most of us are engaged in different roles and to different degrees. And I think there is the question of really assisting and helping people to be placed to work elsewhere, to build on what someone might be doing for you. Scott, how does Two Lines make the print work? Again, having come out of book publishing and then moving on to online and being so grateful that I don't have to worry about making print work anymore. How does Two Lines make the print edition work? Obviously, there are subscriptions.
Yeah, we're also a press in addition to a journal, and we're fully distributed. So the issues of those journals are distributed just like any of our books are. Journals are a pretty hard sell in bookstores, even bookstores with a very cultivated audience, with a very curated selection. People don't tend to gravitate toward the journals in those stores. So, it is mostly subscriptions. I think that's the main model for when we're selling the Two Lines Journal. And, just like a lot of kind of hand selling on our own case, we do sell a number through the website from time to time. So I mean, it's kind of just a variety of ways of getting things out there. But probably when you're talking about a journal, in my experience, the bookstore is not the best way to get it out there.
Which is Taliesin sold in the stores, Sean? Is it largely subscription?
Yes, well, it's funded by the Book Council and distributed by the Book Council, so in theory is available in Welsh bookshops, but we struggle. We struggle with the bookshops themselves not understanding what it means that something is coming out 3 times a year and stocking it for more than 2 weeks.
Exactly.
That's a major battle. And so we might even do a special incentive with a collaboration project between musicians and writers with a CD that's a special gift to the readers, and it's available in the shops for 2 weeks. You really sometimes feel like you're hitting your head against a wall, but you just need to keep going. And going back to this word social, sadly, it does mean that a good chunk of your time is spent on individually building relationships with the person who makes the decision in a specific bookshop. That perhaps more so in the Welsh language scene, because you can list the bookshops on one page of a notebook, but it takes a lot of dedication to do that.
How about the White Review, Daniel? A bookstore subscription?
I can speak more sensibly about music and literature, actually, in the case of distribution. Although I do know that the White Review does appear in pretty much the same kinds of bookstores that music and literature does, at least in the United States, because the White Review is London-based. Music and literature, which is Vermont-based, is also it appears in bookshops in Australia, it's at Foyles, it's all over the place, but it's actually case by case. It's too expensive to distribute, and it ends up being like a better deal for us to work with the booksellers who want it. And so there are the places that are obvious for people who are American or are familiar with New York City. It's going to be McNally Jackson. Those are the people who come to us. But it's more than 30 bookstores at this time. It's just that's of course also a great deal of effort. Everything is by consignment, and it's an individual. It's individually. So it's we depend on online subscriptions as well. But that visibility is important to us. And there's something I'm sure for many people in the audience or here at the table. There's something very beautiful about walking into a bookshop. I was in New York City last year, and I was not aware of this at all. I went into Book Culture, which used to be, it's a bookshop, an independent bookshop that was around the corner from Columbia, and Music and Literature 3 was prominently displayed. Or to see a picture on Twitter of Music and Literature, that you sent to me from Foyles. These it warms our heart, but there's no system behind it. It's ultimately, I think, enthusiastic buyers at those bookstores.
I was going to ask if everyone could say very, very, very quickly what you might be looking for at this point, but I am thinking that that's probably a bulk of the questions from the audience, which we need to turn to now anyway. So let us open the floor for questions. And is there a microphone? Okay, one here.
Thank you. I don't know how this question will go down, but it's stuck in my head and I have to ask it. And I think it's when somebody mentioned visual content in the journals, and I was wondering if any of your journals ever have or would consider publishing short graphic fiction in translation.
We do a graphic fiction issue every February. We do a graphic novel issue every February. Yeah.
Yeah, we were just considering a piece of graphic fiction, actually, and we liked it. Ultimately, we decided, because when you put together a journal, it's often kind of a matter of how things are going to go together and, kind of balancing the dark with the light and those sorts of things. And so we felt like the issue that we were considering it for, it wasn't going to quite work in that context. But I mean, and it can be a little tricky, kind of jumping from a piece of prose to something with drawings on, then back to prose. So it is a bit of a, it's not the easiest thing unless you do like a whole issue of graphic fiction. But we did like it a lot, and we did decide that we wanted to go talk to the translator and try to get more from the same book or maybe some other projects. But it's something that we're very open-minded about. And I think in general, people who work in translation, they seem to be very open-minded about things that break the forms and break the genres. We also publish essays, and we're very, we don't want your standard critical appraisal of something. We want essays that really break the boundary of what the form can do.
Other questions? Oh, come now. Somebody must want to know something. Yes.
Okay, I'll bite on your suggestion and ask what you're looking for.
I mean, I guess really just the best translated literature you have. If you want to talk about regions, there are languages, there are parts of the world that are better covered than others. We're not going to not read something because it comes from Spanish, but if we do have 5 things from Spanish that we've been reading that month or that week, something from Indonesia would be interesting for that reason. We do have an aesthetic. I can't characterize it that well. I would definitely say innovation is involved in it, modernism is involved in it, but probably the best way to think about our aesthetic is just to look at what we've published and get a sense of what we're reading toward.
Well, I think it's similar. It's innovation, I think an experimental edge, and translators both emerging and established, also writers from underrepresented countries and writers. I mean, one of the editors said that he's looking for less known artists doing stellar work.
That's a good way to look at it.
And yes, I think that's. Then I think each of the editors have their own ideas, and I mean, one of my colleagues is over there, Ellen, who's the criticism editor, and maybe some others are here whom I don't actually know because we work virtually, but I think each of the section editors has their own kind of philosophy, but it all fits together along those lines. I think similar to what we've all discussed here.
Daniel?
It's a little more difficult to answer, at least for these two journals, partly because of what I'm doing and what I'm responsible for. So I wouldn't want to speak so much for what Jacques and Ben or James, who are the editors for the White Review's print edition and the online, might actually look for. Although I think there's a great deal of overlap with what Scott said. I think we are curious. We want to find some. And of course, on the one hand, we have authors that we like. We have translators that we like, and we want to see new material in English that hasn't been out, whether it's, in some cases it may also mean that it is an old interview but of great literary quality that hasn't appeared in years, so we want to bring a lot of that material into English. But I think that aesthetically, the sensibility is fairly similar. If speaking for the White Review, I think when they focus on, because they do have a prize for new writers, a short story prize as well, it's looking to see something, that's different. If that there's something about modernist aesthetics maybe behind that, there's something unpredictable about it. But it's very difficult to say, because each issue has its own form, and there may be a writer that you receive a submission and you admire it, and you file the writer's name away and you write an email, and it just doesn't fit in that issue, but it comes back later on because it ultimately comes down to the issue itself and how it's shaped and that.
Exactly.
So, for those of you out there who actually write and translate into Welsh, we are looking for translators who have been so moved by a work of literature that I haven't been able to read or my co-editor hasn't been able to read because we don't speak that language, and they're so moved by it that they just want to spend more time with it, getting to know it intimately and therefore translating it, then we want to know about it. It's simple as that.
I think that's a good guideline to something that you're so enthusiastic about. Yes. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. There was somebody who had a hand up first. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Hello. It's more of a comment. I'll try and make it quick rather than a question. Is that I'm a publisher as well. I have a magazine called Sable, and so we publish many writers of color. And just hearing you is just really, thank you. It's rejuvenated me and encouraged me again, because I feel so downhearted sometimes that I can't pay translators because we have one section that we call, which is just for translation, and it will be African or Asian writers writing in, mother tongue or any other language and English. So, and it's really just interesting to just have writers from those backgrounds writing in languages that people don't expect. So I had an Asian writer who gave me something in a Shetland dialect, and it kind of freaks people out, which is great. I want to freak people out, but just listening to you has really encouraged me to push on, because either we were going to go like digital, and then people started saying, where's the print?
Yes.
So then I'm now trying to balance both of those things again. So if you come across any Black Welsh writers, please, even if it's like just a link or whatever, we could just kind of link with you in that way. It would be wonderful. So this has been wonderful. Thank you all very much.
And now over here.
Thanks, everyone. Could you give us a bit of practical advice on the rights side of things? It's been wonderful to get authors translated into English in literary journals, but one of the things that's proved problematic in my case is that I established that the rights are available.
Sorry, could you speak more directly into the microphone?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, that's better.
So I established that the rights are available for a short story, say, and I pitch it to a journal, and the journal wants to publish it. In a couple of cases, the journal has, because they haven't done this very often before, they've assumed that I've cleared everything to do with the rights, and they have actually neglected to agree with the publisher. So what's the correct protocol if you're pitching to a journal maybe that doesn't publish as much translated literature as you guys, who are all very experienced, but they're journals who are open to translation or new and looking at translation? What should they do, or how should the translator ease that path in terms of the rights handling?
We're somewhat unusual in that we clear the rights and we buy rights from foreign publishers and foreign authors. So we ask our translators to ascertain that rights are available, to confirm that, and to provide that information. I understand that other journals simply want the proof that you have cleared permission to publish with the anywhere, regardless of that you've simply cleared permission to publish a translation. But do any of you have experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, we do make this information available on our website, just so we're very, very clear about it. But we do put it on the translator to make sure that the permissions are there to actually, deal with the author or the estate or whoever holds the rights. It's their responsibility to make sure that they have that right to translate it and publish it in English. And our contract says as much. So when it's signed, that's kind of the way that you are taking responsibility for getting those rights. Sometimes in the case of serials, we'll actually work with the publisher and there may be a payment involved, but things that have never ever been published or never ever purchased in any way, it is the translator's responsibility as far as we're concerned.
And certainly that information is more readily available as opposed to the pre-digital era when you now you can check in with a publisher. It's a little tricky if someone's published something in a magazine and the magazine doesn't necessarily have up-to-date contact information, or you can't. Some cases are easier than others. But Daniel?
I mean, all I'll add is that digital rights are complicated. Online rights are complicated, and it's simply echoed from the editorial standpoint. It's one thing to actually assess the quality of a translation and a text and whether or not you want it to go in, but then to actually have another step where because this has happened with things that I've wanted to do, but I've not asked for the translation first. Essentially, I've tried to clear things, like a chapter from a Flaubert biography in French that would work well in a New York magazine because it's interesting. And having the translator on standby and having money for the translator, but then the French publishers saying, no, well, yes, we'll give you a special deal of 800 euros, and then you're like, well, no, it's, we need to actually pay the translator. So, and then, okay, a special deal, even a more special deal, 600 euros, so, I mean, it's not fair to actually make the translator work first. And I think that's the same thing. Is once that the permission is there, and the permission may come from the publisher, may also in some cases come from the author. A lot of starting translators work directly with other young authors, and it depends on the language as well. The French are not very flexible, or at least certain French presses with digital rights.
That's true.
The Wiley Agency, if they know who you are, they can be flexible. We've just done something, an introduction that Ali Smith wrote to a Pushkin book of collected stories by a Spanish writer, and they gave us the rights, and it will be up there for 1 year, not in perpetuity, but that's because of the relations that we have with the agency and with the author and the translator. So.
But you didn't expect the translator to negotiate all of that. The translator just had to establish that it was okay to translate it.
That's something I wanted, and I read the book and liked it, and I thought, well, this author's not getting any attention, and there hasn't been any reviews. The author died a couple of years ago, but the very first thing that we did was contact rights. I mean, we contacted, I wrote to the translator, and I wrote to somebody who knew Ali Smith, and then our digital editor proceeded with that. And it was the question of whether it's possible or not. If it's not possible, we don't do it. If it's possible, we do it. That's a different case. That's a reprint, right? Somebody didn't write this for us. But the permission, without the permission, you can't do it. And I mean, the procedure is, with everything that we do, let's say, even if it's for music and literature and print, let's say, a review of a Krasner Kai novel in a German newspaper that appeared 5 years ago, we try to clear every permission. Even if it seems like it's probably fine. I think we're professionals, none of us want to go to court. And even when you have those deadlines, it's essential that what you're doing is legal.
With us, it's a project-by-project basis. So I think, as you were saying, not interested in legal procedure, so we double-check that everything is absolutely fine before we go to print. And from the Welsh language point of view, you were saying it depends on the language. It also depends what language you're translating into. So any of you editing minority language reviews out there, very often you don't have to pay for translating rights because your print run is so small, etc. So take advantage of that. It does mean that you can introduce classics or newer voices into your language so that people can read perhaps something that they can also access in English because they also speak English, but they can access it in their own language at relatively little cost for the magazine itself. So it's worth doing.
I think we are out of time, so thank you all for coming. Thank our panelists, Scott Esposito, Julia Sherwood, Daniel Medin, and Sean Malungus Dafydd. So thank you, everybody.